Would you be comfortable having someone watch you paint? What about create? How about finding a perspective despite an eye condition? Well, these questions left me wondering, and I'm sure have also piqued your interest. Here it's straight from our guest artist Susan Logorecki to talk about her journey in public art, how to get started creating a scene surrounded by people, ways to overcome criticisms and negative feedback, finding creative strategies when the odds are not working in your favor, and how to grow as an artist. If you want to be part of the conversation, then send in your questions and topics you want us to cover to hello@etcherlab.com. Hey, this is Jessie from Etcher. We believe in your power to create, so we invited artists from all around the globe to inspire you to keep on creating. Join us in this journey and let's celebrate creativity. This is Make More Art, the podcast. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining Make More Art. I'm pretty excited about this episode and just reading through your bio. We're talking offline, and I said that I'm learning a lot. So I'm really excited to learn more through your story as an artist, how you progressed, and how did you get to where you are now. I'm very interested with all the projects, especially the latest one at the Phoenix Airport. But before we dive into all of that details, can you share a little bit more about your journey? I know you've been doing this for a while. You have works. Probably if I go to a certain airport or a hotel, I'll probably see one of your works. But for the benefit of our audience listening and seeing you for the first time, hearing you for the first time, can you share a little bit more about your journey?
Sure. Yeah, it's been a long journey, as you said. So, yeah, and it's like, how do you start from being a little kid, making drawings at home to, building a 10,000 square foot floor in an airport? It's like
Right.
it's the many steps. Yeah, I guess I was one of those kids who always, made stuff. I always drew. I always like had a set of markers and I liked reading and writing. I came from a creative family. My brother's a filmmaker. My sister plays violin. And so my parents definitely like supported our creative endeavors, I think,
Mhm.
although they were artists. After high school, I went to junior college for a few years and I started studying art seriously there when I was about 17. And I took all kinds of classes. I took, ceramics, printmaking, drawing, painting, just did all that foundation level coursework, which was really fun and exciting. And it helped me kind of hone in on the type of artist I wanted to be and the kind of materials I liked using. But I started out with a very broad approach.
Mhm.
Then I transferred to art school in San Francisco after a few years and finished up my bachelor's of fine arts degree there in drawing and painting, and sort of was just doing more oil paintings and a lot of color pencil drawings, mixed media drawings, probably. Always kind of in this landscape based type of work. I always made that kind of work since the beginning, actually.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And then I took a few years off, and I actually met my husband in undergrad at art school, and we moved to Austin, Texas for a while and just lived there and worked a bunch of jobs and made art. I was just making oil paintings then. And then we came back to California, and I did my master's of fine arts degree at Cal State Long Beach. That was almost 20 years ago, actually, which is that went by fast. Uh, and I worked at the Getty Museum when I was in school as well. Uh,
Wow.
so that was really part of my education too, I think. Uh, and after I graduated, I started showing in galleries in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
and I sold out a couple shows, which was really exciting. And I started getting commissioned work. And that's when I quit my day job, which was like in about 2005. And I've been doing this full time um, as a profession ever since then. And I did a lot of kind of original. At that point, I kind of stopped doing oil painting in graduate school, and I was just doing these color pencil drawings like the one you see behind me. And so I started doing a lot of commissioned work, and my work started ending up in lobbies of like law firms and banks and conference rooms. And that's kind of what got me interested in public art, was like my work
Mhm.
sort of led me there, that it was already ending up in these public spaces. So it was a natural fit, I think. And then I started doing temporary public art projects, which gave me um, the experience on how to manage a budget and how to work with a fabricator.
Mhm.
And then from there, I started applying for for permanent projects and just started doing those in about 2012, 13.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been about 10 years since I've been doing public art, since I added that in. So yeah, that's sort of the general kind of condensed version of my path.
It's pretty condensed, but at the same time, it's like, wow, you've tried your hands on a lot of things. And I also love the transition that you made from one, like you were doing, you said oil. And what's also interesting about your journey, Suzanne, is that you studied art. For anyone who's listening right now, and this is a common, I guess, misconception for a lot of people is that kids nowadays they are exposed to it, but they are not, say, encouraged to pursue art. But in your case, you are fortunate to be surrounded by your family who are very creative and supported rather in your creative endeavors. But would you
Yeah.
say if someone is starting out at a pretty young age to really attend classes or subscribe or to trainings related to art?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the world's changed a lot since I
Yes.
started in 1990. There was no internet. So there was no option of doing, there's so many online classes now and workshops, and
Mhm.
that wasn't available, at all. So you can really be anywhere in the world and study with someone, across the planet, which is so exciting. So, I mean, I definitely think, that's probably really worthwhile.
Mhm.
In person's great, of course. I mean, during the pandemic, my husband's a teacher and he was teaching art classes virtually for a couple of years there. And it's like he was saying, you get about 70 to 80%, he felt, of the in-person instruction, which is like pretty good, actually.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's not actually like being there and really kind of engaging with your students and their artwork too. And, people holding it up for the camera, it's a little different. But still, if that's what you've got, if, you live somewhere that's very remote, I think
Mhm.
that can be really amazing and helpful.
Mhm.
Uh, I really, I was never an A student. Um, I was not the best in the class at all. But
Mhm.
that really wasn't the point. I think just learning like observational drawing teaches you so many valuable skills, just how to really look and how
Mhm.
to sit down and really, um, just really see the world differently. And that's the most important thing rather than having successful sort of portfolio at the end. I mean, you'll probably end up with that anyway if you put the
Right.
time in.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's incredibly valuable to study with someone who knows more. You can only do so much on your own, I think.
Agree. That is a good point. And I normally ask that question because most of the people that I've had on are teachers. And like what I said earlier, just reading from your bio, I learned a lot. But hearing you talk about how important or to tap into getting a mentor or a coach to teach art is something that would really help someone who's starting out in their creative pursuit. Now, you mentioned that you try your hands on a lot of things. When I was listening, you talk about your journey and particularly you fell in love with landscapes. When you were starting out, was there any other particular subject that you dabbled with, or has it always been landscape? Because with your public art, it is still somehow related to landscape, and like the painting behind you is also a landscape and from a perspective. So subjects when you were starting out, has it always been landscape? And why landscape, by the way, Suzanne?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I guess on a personal level, I would say I really, I grew up actually on the Central Coast and of California, and there's a long history there of landscape art being really sort of important to that area. And I think it was like the first art that I really saw and connected to was landscape art. Um, when I was in school, I did try a lot of different things. I mean, obviously, you have to draw still lives and
Mm,
um, the figure wasn't big as well. I did took a lot of figure drawing. Never really connected to that as deeply. I love doing abstraction as well, and there's a really big abstract component to my artwork, I think,
yes.
as well.
Mm,
But in terms of doing just abstraction, I know people really can connect to that as like its own language, and they really feel that. And it's always been a little harder for me to divorce it from imagery totally.
Mhm.
Uh, I've never felt it's as meaningful as it is when it's connected to imagery in a place. For me personally, and when I go and look at art, I can feel it in other people's work, but just in my own, it's a little bit harder for me to get there.
Mhm.
Um, so, and it's just a lot of trial and error. I mean, I've spent years. I mean, gosh, if I'd kept everything I've ever made, it would fill this room.
Okay. Okay.
So there was
Right.
a lot of experimentation, you
Mhm.
know. But I always came back to landscape. And I had one of my mentors, actually, my teacher, Robin Smith at
Mhm.
Monterey Peninsula College, when I was first starting out, said to me, I had these motifs that I would use a lot. And she's like, you need to put those aside for a while. And if they come back, then they were really meant to be. And I always felt like that was great advice and stuck with me in a lot of different ways, because we can get kind of stuck
Exactly.
in like if you find a motif that's like particularly dramatic, you can maybe accidentally exhaust it.
That's true.
You know?
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. Because I was when I was listening to you, I was okay. She was particularly interested in landscape, but what led her to be interested and to pursue landscape? Now let's switch to um, public art. For
Hmm.
a lot of artists, I know you have showcased your works. You said some of the galleries, and you've sold and you've done commissions. But this is also a common, especially for artists, right? That some people are so scared to get their works displayed and seen by other
Mhm.
people, or for someone working, like and someone watching you. And for public art, I'm sure you've had a lot of experience with people like, okay, what is it doing? I mean, what is she doing? And watching the progress.
Yep.
How do you get to that point, level of
Yeah.
confidence and comfortability to be able to do public art and have people, yeah, of course it's public, watch you create?
Yeah, and not only watching, but I mean, it's participatory, I mean, you definitely are working with a community,
Right.
and, you want to have their input too, and it's not always, nice or what you
Uh-huh.
want to hear. So, I mean, you have to really have a thick skin, and that takes time to develop,
Mhm.
I don't think it gets easier necessarily, I just think you get more used to it, and you know that it's part of the process even, and if it
Uh-huh.
doesn't go your way, it's if people disagree, well, the process for public art, just let me get into that a little bit, is so you have initial idea, you have a proposal, the proposal is accepted by a committee of experts,
Mhm.
and they're municipal leaders, artists, et cetera, a community member, maybe or two. And then when you actually develop the artwork, you meet with them several times and you hear their notes. And so how I like to think of it in the very beginning, it was hard to hear criticism, especially if you're really connected to what you're making and it's not landing, you
Mhm.
know. But it's different with public art than studio art. Studio art, you're totally in control. You don't have to adhere to anybody else's perspective. Um, but public art's all about that exchange. And I actually love that
Mhm.
because it is, really where the creativity comes in. How can I take their notes and merge it with my vision? And that is a great creative assignment, actually. It's not one all artists like, because a lot of
Mhm.
artists like to be in total control.
Yes.
And not have to hear, what other people would prefer to see in their opinions.
Mhm.
But I feel like, they hire me as an expert, so I should take everything in, and it's my job to kind of, suss through everything and figure out what needs to stay and what doesn't pertain. And so, if you can kind of be a little more objective, and see it that way, it's helpful.
Mhm.
But there's definitely like things people have said over the years that they get stuck in there. It's like,
How
yeah.
follow-up question to that, Suzanne, because criticism is something that what prevents people from showcasing their work, especially for a lot of artists who have a huge potential to for their art to be seen and admired by people or to be put up in a gallery.
Yeah.
You did mention that some of the feedback and criticism get stuck in there, but you've been doing this for a while. So what is your, I would say, piece of advice to someone who might be struggling in that aspect, let's say receiving feedback and criticism, and sometimes we could be our worst critic ourselves.
Yeah.
So what would you say as a seasoned artist like yourself would be a good advice to overcome that, or to process, I guess, criticisms and feedback, or even your own, you know?
Yeah, it's such a hard thing because I mean, it's not, it's such a personal thing that you're making, and then you put it out in the world and you just feel like your heart gets stomped on. It's like when people have, say, when they have children, that it's like your heart walking around the world. It's like, okay, it's not probably that intense. I'm sure having children is more, but there is something to that, I think, with this too. I guess I would say, if you really want to do this seriously, you're going to have to accept that as part of the process.
Mhm.
And that, I like to think of art and art making as something bigger than myself, and that I have a responsibility to it that's greater than feeling good when someone compliments me. And so, yeah, you can I think taking in the initial shock of maybe some cruel words, but then really looking at it and then, okay, that maybe wasn't delivered nicely, but where's the truth? And did it actually sting because there's truth to it? And that's something I actually need to maybe investigate, and just being able to see your responsibility to the thing you're making as a higher responsibility than feeling good, you
Mhm.
know. It's not easy, but I mean, I think that's one of the great things about making art, is that it does take you to places inside yourself that you wouldn't maybe necessarily go, or aren't comfortable, and that's, hopefully why people want to make art too, not because it's fun and relaxing, but it's also like it can test you, and
Mhm.
that's a good thing.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely right. And thank you for that insight, Suzanne. I think it's a piece of advice that a lot of people need to hear, whether you're making art or doing something that you would, um, any form of art that you are having reservations when it comes to sharing it with the world because you're too scared to receive feedback or to be criticized. So it's a personal thing, like what you said. And I think it takes time, but
For sure.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe, you should keep it under wraps until you're comfortable with putting it out there. Maybe it's like you don't have to share everything you make. I still don't. I mean,
Mhm.
I definitely make things that never see the light of day still, So, there's that too, that maybe it isn't ready and it's not time yet. And
Yeah.
that's okay, you know?
Like absolutely. I mean, in not everything, and I've read this somewhere that for a lot of artists, whether it's self fulfillment to be able to create something and then showcases, or just create something. It doesn't have to be always monetized, but
Right.
it's ability to create, and what fills you with joy, I guess, is another thing that you also need to consider. If you're having fun doing it, if it fills you up, then go ahead and do it. Now, in line with that, I also want to tap on, because you do a lot of public arts, you do a lot of perspective. I mean, looking at the painting behind you, so just like from a
It's a little bit
doesn't yeah.
warped, the angle, which kind of is
Yeah, from a
interesting.
certain angle, and this is sort of what's consistent with your work as well, Susan. When I was looking at some of your works posted online, I've read in your bio that for someone who's now very much into perspective, right, and like 3D version, that you had a condition growing up, something to do. And correct me if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. Is it strabismus?
Yeah, correct.
Strabismus. Okay, got it
Yeah.
right. Right. So you're born with an eye condition, strabismus. So which impacts, for those who are listening, and you could probably Google this as well. It impacts your depth and depth perception and 3D vision. But
Right.
how does that influence? Because we touched on landscapes, but this
Yeah.
condition, how would you say this influenced your art? Given that, when I think about perception and 3D, which is something that is very visible in your works, whether it's public art or mixed media. So can you share a little bit more about that, Suzanne?
Yeah, it's definitely really influenced my work. I think it's also influenced just the fact that I did landscape as well. It's
Yeah.
a, having this condition, it's a little bit trickier just moving through the world.
Mhm.
So I don't see, most people, their eyes work together, their two eyes come to a point and you
Yeah.
see a merged vision, and
Mhm.
that's 3D. So with my eyes, I don't have that's called binocular vision. And I don't have that. I have monocular vision where each eye is just sees individually. And I can kind of move back and forth.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and so the world is flattened for me somewhat. I still have a little bit, from what I understand, like the way the brain kind of accepts that it can still see 3D somewhat, but not fully like everybody else.
Yes.
And so, driving's harder, sports, things like that. Even something like walking downstairs can be really challenging.
Mhm.
Uh, so I had 4 surgeries when I was a child, and I just had my 5th about 2 months ago, actually.
Wow.
Uh, yeah. So, I'm still kind of healing from that as well. But, yeah, I think it's definitely influenced my work. When I first started, as an art student, I didn't really realize that I couldn't see like everybody else. And so like I'd hang my still life drawing up on the wall next to everyone else's, and it just looked kind of cubist, actually.
Okay. Okay.
And the teacher would say things like, I can't tell where the space is and where the object is. And
Mhm.
I remember just feeling like, well, that's kind of my life, though.
Yeah.
I don't always know either. And that's why, it's like it takes me 30 seconds to get on and off an escalator,
Yeah.
Um, but thinking, and just feeling kind of bad about that for a while, because it was like, I'm never going to be able to do it right. That whole
Mhm.
idea of doing it right,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, but then thinking, there's a lot I'm never going to be able to do in life, definitely with this condition, but there are some things that I can do that no one else can do, and no one else can see like I can. And that can be a strategy for me that maybe I can use. And so just tapping into that pretty early on and thinking about ways to express that, not just to express the way that I see, to explain that to people, but to kind of use that as a strategy to talk about other issues. Um, and like in this piece behind me, I would say, this kind of flattens, the imagery is sort of 3D, even though it's like from multiple
Yeah.
perspectives. But then the white streets sort of flatten everything out, and this kind of push-pull kind
Mm.
of tension in the piece. And that's something I like to play with a lot, to really talk about kind of, yeah, these kind of delights and anxieties that we experience in built spaces. And so just taking the way that I see, and trying to always try to reimagine it, as a strategy to talk about issues that we all can relate to. That's really what interests me, I would say.
And thank you for sharing that piece, Suzanne. Because when I was reading through it, and I was surprised that, that with that condition, you pivoted and like what you said, created a strategy, that what I would say, shifted your art and make it, unique. Because it's when I look at your work, it's perspective. It provided you with a unique perspective that's not everybody can see. And so like what you said, it looks 3D, right? When I look at it, looking at the painting behind you, it's 3D. But yeah, the white lines sort of flatten it out. So one of the things that you also mentioned, when I was reading through your bio, is that you have your art. It creates this possibilities. When people look at it, it's not just one thing, like one perspective. And you mentioned this earlier, that it's as if you're looking at from different angles. And I know one of
Yeah.
the inspiration as well for your artwork is all the flights that you have taken. And I was looking at it, I was like, well, that's really brilliant, because normally people would like take photos, right? I am very fond of doing that when I'm
Yeah.
of
Me too.
30,000 feet, right? But you shifted and make art out of it. And it's really refreshing to be able to see that, because normally those like tiny spaces, right? It can create this sort of, it's crowded. But when I look at your art, it granted me a certain feeling that, oh, okay, this is new. And it doesn't feel like crowded at all. but
Hmm.
it's beautiful to see, and it provided me with all of these possibilities. So can you share a little bit more about that perspective and idea when you start creating these art pieces, these artworks, Suzanne?
Sure. Yeah, I actually, so yeah, for a while I did charter helicopters and I would take pictures
Yeah.
from them, use that as source material.
Mhm.
That's super fun. Actually, though, I really do have a fear of heights, to be honest.
Really? Well,
Yeah,
okay. For someone who has like this condition and fear of, did you say flights or heights?
heights. Yeah, I
Height.
fly too, but heights particularly because I do get this vertigo sometimes. It's
Okay.
actually
Okay.
getting better after my last surgery, but
Okay.
I do actually have vertigo because I'm not really sure spatially what's going on. And so
Okay.
being up in a helicopter and when you're taking pictures, you don't want the doors on, so it's totally open.
Okay.
Um, it's pretty
Well,
terrifying, actually.
talk about challenging yourself and pushing yourself
Yeah.
to that limit. Okay.
And I would usually fly with a couple friends and they would take all the pictures and I would sort of direct them where to shoot. And so, I mean, the good thing about it is I'm there to do a job. And so I'm distracted by that, which is great. So I'm not thinking too much about how all the ways I could die, but,
Okay.
but also just the experience of being up there. I
Mhm.
don't know if you've ever flown in a helicopter.
No,
Um,
I'm not sure if I can, but yeah, go ahead.
I mean, and flying in an airplane is like that too, although it's a little bit more, yeah, the windows are so little. It's like you do get it's like seeing a panorama out of a pinhole a little,
Yeah.
it's a little bit hard to get the idea of big space there. But in the helicopter, you get to hover, over an area too. And it's so magical. And you really do see this like amazing panorama that's really kind of stitched together, too, that it's not, one sort of nice, clean Gestalt image is like many neighborhoods that are kind of cobbled together over a period of time. You really sort of understand that
Mhm.
how cities are put together. So really experiencing that was important for me. I haven't done it in a while. The last couple of projects I've worked on, it's not been possible and actually got yeah, sometimes they don't want you to do it because of insurance and safety reasons.
Yeah.
So,
They have a point. Okay.
so,
But yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so that's definitely been a really important part of my creative path, I would say, to get out of my comfort zone and get up there and actually take my own images as well and use them. Because a lot of times I'll buy them from other people or get them offline or
Mhm.
online. There's a lot of places where you can get aerial views of cities. But that's been a very important part of my process, I think.
I love how while I was listening you talk about, having this condition as a kid, trying out new things growing up and in your art journey, right? And then now pushing yourself to a challenge that enables you to find inspiration and to create a different form of art with unique perspective. What I've gotten from there, Suzanne, is that you have this ability to challenge more than challenging yourself, but you would want to see growth in your process in your art, and in order to do that you have to step out of your comfort zone and really,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I think that's when I mean, hearing your story now and looking at your art pieces, specifically this one behind you, it tells more than just it's a unique perspective, but the story behind it. So how, I mean, for anyone who might be listening, Suzanne, if they are facing those kind of challenges, we might not know exactly what those are, but with your journey, when you started up until where you are right now, what would you say would be your biggest piece of advice for anyone who might be in that space, struggling and maybe thinking that the challenges that they have or the condition that they have might be a hindrance or a roadblock to do
Mm-hmm.
art or
Yeah,
mhm,
I would, yeah, start doing some research then on people who have had, because there's definitely a lot of people out there
mhm,
that have had visual issues or mental health issues that have been really successful artists. I think of like the artist Daniel Johnston or
mhm,
that comes to mind. Definitely, you have to find your own voice, that it's like, I think that's the most important thing. And you're only going to find that by having a consistent, a lot of people who've been on your show talk about that, having a consistent practice is a huge part of that. Um, and trusting that you have something to offer as well, um, the goal maybe isn't to ever be to make a living from it or something like that, but you're adding to the conversation of art that's as long as human history, and that's important. So find your place in it, and definitely looking to art history, looking to contemporary art, learning more about that, I think is really vital to that path. Yeah.
I want to touch on what you said here on your bio about the ability of the organic handmade quality provides viewers with a new perspective on their city and the chance to see it as an outgrowth of our human nature, a large ongoing project built by many and shared by all. I was like, when I was reading through that, I don't know, for some weird reason, it spoke to me because there are a lot of things that was built by many but not shared by all, right? When we look at spaces or buildings, and people can be it can be very overwhelming to be stuck in a certain space or in a building. But with your art and just looking and reading through this, it spoke to me in a sense that, okay, art can do this. And with Susan's art, she has the ability to share that perspective with others, that those spaces that you see, it's common and being stuck in a city, but with your art from that perspective, it can give you that sense that it is built by many, but it is shared by all. And when you look at that, for others, it can be overwhelming, but yours can provide some sort of respite, in a way, because it's beautiful and it communicates a certain feeling. So when can you expand a little bit more on that? I know it has something to do with your process, and you said that it's a dialogue, right? When you create, and you would want to be able to share that. Like what you said, your art deals with themes of uncertainty and optimism within our cities. But can you expand a little bit more on that aspect, Suzanne?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing that back to me. It's such an optimistic statement, actually.
Mhm.
And I do think my work is ultimately optimistic, although I do like to be critical as well. I do like to think that there's criticality in my work, but
Mhm.
ultimately I think it is optimistic. Yeah, shared by all is such an interesting statement in 2022, actually, when our cities, a lot of them are getting really expensive and pushing people out. And, in Los Angeles, like the homeless situation here is really intense.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is due, I mean, there's many factors. Yeah, this idea of shared by all, it's like, how true is that actually? But I think what I really, I think art captures a moment, but also, I mean, what I want mine to do is really to inspire people to kind of make more equitable cities that are really shared by all. I follow, like, on social media, a lot of um, urban planners and
Ah.
architects and people like that. And so I read a lot about what's going on in cities across the world, and what's being developed and how, and what are the ideas, behind it, in terms of just like, cultural, environmental, mental health, even is like being built into cities now. Um, and all that stuff really interests me a lot, and data capture.
Mm.
That all kind of goes into what I'm making as well. When I do public art, especially in airports, it's a little bit, um, it's a fraught place. It's a place that can be very anxiety provoking, and also it's very, can be boring.
It's true.
So you do have to be a little careful in terms of, like, you don't want to be like super critical of a place too. You want to give people a delightful experience. It kind of pops them out of their routine, and like maybe, their spiral of, doom or boredom, wherever their brains are going.
Yeah.
So there is that too, where it's like you do want to kind of turn up the volume on happiness and delight a little bit, and maybe down on criticality. Probably the work that would go into a gallery would be the opposite, where you turn it up a little bit in terms of criticality, and down,
Mhm.
um, but or equal on the delight factor as well. It's like I definitely think about, who's your audience, too. That matters a lot,
Mhm.
depending on the artwork that I'm making. And so, and a lot of artists, again, don't like to think about that. I really do like to think about that. have an ideal viewer in my mind and make work for them in mind.
That is a really good point about knowing and identifying who your audience is for your work, because that would be, I guess, your starting point as to what it is that you would want to communicate through your art.
Yes. Yeah, one of the best pieces of advice I actually have ever gotten, artist Linda Bessemer came to a graduate seminar, and she said to have all of us there who are about to get our degrees, she said, it's up to you all to find your audience, and it may not be the audience that you want, and it may not be as big an audience as you want, but you need to go and find them, and that's your job. And I love that, because again, that's that thing of like, you're responsible to this thing that's greater than you, you know?
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot, actually.
And it can be seen, and it's evident in your work. And hearing you talk about, that you follow urban, planners, I was like, okay, so this is what's great about art. When you look at a piece, right, it speaks volumes, and when you hear the story behind it, there's really more layers and layers of, coming from the artists themselves. And I have to ask this, Suzanne, with your experience and years of doing it, 10 years of doing public art, I'm sure you have certain favorites. We talked about earlier that your works can be seen in lobbies and banks, and now the most recent project at the airport. Because I can be boring, but you know what? I love looking at like art pieces, like installations and public art, especially in spaces and places where people would normally perceive them as it's a boring space. But I'm sure, and I would love to see Phoenix Airport someday or one of these days to see your actual. But what would you say is your favorite or most favorite art, either public art or artwork or art piece that you have made?
That I made.
Very different, yeah.
I would say, well, probably the two that are I feel like are the most were the most exciting for me to make, and I think that where the material and the imagery worked really well together is the piece I just completed, the floor and the 28 wall pieces in the Phoenix Airport. And just to describe it really quickly for listeners, it's a long, narrow corridor that goes, it's called a connector bridge that goes from security to the gates in the Southwest Terminal. And it's 10,000 square foot floor. So as you walk through the floor, you go from images of Phoenix, night city images, to daytime houses, to the fields around Phoenix, and then finally to the mountains. And so as the viewer walking through the piece sort of experiences all these different landscapes. And the concept is this idea of a glass bottom plane. And additionally, there's 28 airplane window-shaped wall pieces that have similar views that you also see as you're walking down this corridor. And it's all made out of terrazzo, which is sort of different types of rocks. It's like granite and quartz and things like that, mixed with an epoxy, and that has different colors in it to make up the landscape. But it also has things like broken mirror and mother of pearl and like little shiny kind of bits in it as well.
Wow. Okay.
And I think, just like with my work, my work has all these little bits coming together. And then also the terrazzo has all these little bits coming together. And then in addition, it's actually literally made from the desert floor, and you're looking down on the desert floor. So there's just a great synchronicity between materials and the concept and the formal imagery like that. I just think that was really successful. Another project that I feel like did that here in Los Angeles in a train station, I created 8 large drawings that were fabricated into mosaic tile, and similar type of thing where it's like all these little, and it was actually hand cut by a company in Montreal called Mosaica, and they did an incredible job. And once again, like all these little bits coming together, just like my artwork. I think it just translated so beautifully. Those are probably my 2 favorites, I would say. I would love to work in those materials again. Just really fun materials to work with that I didn't know much about before doing those projects too. So I got a real education too.
Okay. Again, I mean, just hearing it, and thank you for highlighting those 2. I guess for our listeners, and probably if you want to check out the video from YouTube, we're gonna post a photo, I guess, or maybe from Suzanne of these projects, so you can also see them. And if you are passing by Phoenix Airport, do check that out. I'm sure you will enjoy hearing you talk about the story behind that project. It makes more interesting, especially the materials that you use and the different textures and the thought process behind that project. This makes it more interesting. And personally, for someone like myself who is very much into public art and art installations, I personally would love to see that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I should ask you really quickly, just in terms of like how these things get made, since I don't know much about these materials, there were so many people that made this happen too, the fabricators. You have a project manager who works for the city that's sort of the between myself and the fabricator, the architectural team. I mean, it was like these Zoom meetings where it'd be like pages of people, you're filing through. I mean, it's like, it definitely isn't just me. It's like a whole team of people that help support my vision too. And I'm definitely so grateful to have all those experts on board. I could never have accomplished what I've accomplished by myself. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you for also highlighting that, Suzanne. That is a huge project that you did, and definitely there were a lot of people involved. And one other thing that I picked up from that is you said that you didn't have a lot of information, knowledge about those materials. So it's sort of imposing another challenge to yourself and learning. So it's really pushing yourself to get out of your comfort zone, learn something new, and grow as an artist.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in learning. I'm learning a lot from our conversation. But I'm also interested because I asked you about your favorite projects. But what's up ahead for Suzanne? What are the projects that you have in the pipeline?
Let's see. I have a mural and 4 new original paintings hanging up at LAX in the Southwest Terminal and Baggage Claim. If anybody's making their way through there, they'll be there till January. I'm also going to be creating a mural in my neighborhood for a company that designs climate change websites for NASA. And this couple that runs it are also interested in permaculture. And so I don't know if y'all know what that is, but it's basically
share a little bit, more about that.
I know nothing, but just from what I've sort of learned of the little bit of research I've done so far, is just this idea of, using what's already there in terms of like gardening and farming and things like that, and having these sort of systems in place that feed themselves. And so there's very little human footprint on the land, but it's like sustainable farming and things like that. So I'm really interested to like mine their data bases and learn their lingo and sort of create an artwork for the exterior of their offices. That's sort of my project probably for the fall. And I'm making new work too. Making a body of work. I think I'm going to go back to oil painting actually.
I'm pretty looking forward to that. Yeah. And to that upcoming projects. Well, you're such a very talented artist, Suzanne. And just, with the time that I spent with you, I learned a lot, and more than just the technicalities and this whole world of public art, but you as a person, as an artist. It's a privilege to have you on Make More Art. And we look forward to seeing more of your works. My friends are actually in LA right now, so I would definitely tell them to do check out. So that's up until January, right? Yeah. Okay, but we'll definitely, if you want to learn more about Suzanne, we'll also drop in her website and the description box, so that Suzanne, correct me if I'm not pronouncing your last name correctly. Is it Logoretzi or?
Pretty close, actually. Logoretzi.
Oh, okay. All right. Logoretzi.com. So I will definitely include that as well as Instagram, because I know everyone's always looking for the handler and Instagram handler. So we'll definitely include all of these informations. And again, those art pieces and art installations that Suzanne mentioned as well, we'll also include that in the video format. So do check out our YouTube version of this podcast. Suzanne, it's been a pleasure having you on. It's a delight, really, to be able to interview, and an honor to be able to interview you. Thanks to Bonnie. But any sort of like final golden nugget for our audience, especially those who are like enthusiasts or probably hearing public art for the first time, process behind it.
I would say, just a daily practice is so important, even if you can just do 15, 20 minutes a day. We have a daily exercise practice, spiritual practice, cooking practice, add an art practice into that. You can accomplish a lot in a year if you put 20 minutes in a day. So, and then in terms of public art, if people are interested in getting into that, go to your local city council and see what art opportunities there are in Los Angeles. They paint those electrical boxes that just sort of house like wires and things like that. And it's like a little art opportunity now that the city gives a small stipend to people that are getting started. So there's projects like that out there, or you can create your own, approach a business and offer to do a mural. There's definitely opportunities out there, but you got to put yourself out there.
Beautifully said. Suzanne, thank you again so much for being on Make More Art, and we look forward to seeing more of your works. Do check out her website, her Instagram, or drop by Phoenix Airport or LAX, and make sure to check out her art. Thanks for being on the show, Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really an honor. It was great to talk with you. Appreciate it.
Take care of yourself. I'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Suzanne's innate talent, coupled with her desire to start a dialogue about space, is truly inspiring. Her eagerness to grow is reflected in her passion to learn different things and step out of her comfort zone. What have you done recently to help you grow in your creative pursuits? Do let us know by leaving your comments through the blog post associated with this podcast at etcherlab.com/Suzanne.